Hello and welcome. I am absolutely thrilled to be with you today because we are tackling a really critical topic in medical coding. In this explainer, we're going to totally master behavioral health coding for alcohol use disorders. Now, this is just part one of the series, so we're focusing heavily on the substance use hierarchy, the core F10 disorders, and acute intoxication coding. By the time we wrap up, you're going to have this rock-solid, structured framework for navigating these patient charts with absolute clinical precision. So grab your notes and let's jump right in. Here's a quick look at our clinical workflow roadmap for today. We'll start with the screening transition, move into the hierarchy rule, then break down the core F10 classifications, look at acute intoxication, and wrap up with a summary and a quick preview of part two. Okay, let's dive into this very first step of reading a patient's chart, the screening phase, and how we transition from Z codes to F codes. So, when a patient is first evaluated, providers will often use screening codes, right? Things like Z13.39 for mental health or behavioral disorder screenings, or maybe Z13.89 for other specified disorders. Now, these Z codes are great, but they basically just tell us, hey, a test or assessment was performed. But, and this is a really crucial distinction, once that screening comes back positive for an active substance use disorder, those Z codes just don't cut it anymore. We absolutely have to transition over to the active disorder category, which sits right in that F10 through F19 block. This brings us to what I like to call the golden rule of screening. And it's simple. Do not use screening codes once a disorder is identified. From a pure coding standpoint, a positive screen means you immediately abandon those Z codes. Literally, just leave them behind. They've done their job. You transition directly over to the appropriate F code so you can accurately capture the patient's active condition.
All right, let's move right along this section two, the ICD-10-CM hierarchy rule.
And this brilliantly illustrates the core logic of substance use coding. It's a mandatory hierarchy. At the very top, representing the absolute highest clinical and coding priority, we have dependence. This is for your moderate to severe conditions. Sitting right below that in the middle is abuse, which covers mild alcohol use disorders or harmful use. And finally, at the base, we have use. That's the lowest priority, and you really only use it when the documentation is unspecified and just totally lacks any details about abuse or dependence. So, what does this all mean for you? It means you have to follow this incredibly strict, mandatory rule. You must assign only one code per substance. That's it. If a provider documents that a patient has both alcohol abuse and alcohol dependence, you definitely do not code both. You follow that pyramid we just talked about, and you default straight to the highest documented severity. So in that case, dependence. It's a strict, single-code rule that keeps our medical records perfectly precise and completely avoids redundancy. Now we're moving down the clinical workflow to Section 3, Core F10 Category Classifications. Think of the overall F10 family like a giant tree that separates cleanly into 3 branching pathways, perfectly mirroring that hierarchy we just discussed. On one side, we have the use branch, for when documentation is super unclear. Then we have the abuse branch for mild conditions. And finally, the dependence branch for those moderate to severe conditions. And from there, each of these main branches divides even further into specific 5th and 6th characters, depending on whether the condition is uncomplicated, in remission, or causing other major issues. Let's detail those first 2 branches. For alcohol abuse, which is a mild disorder, you're looking at F10.1. That expands out to F10.10 for an uncomplicated case, or F10.11 if it's in remission. Now, contrast that with alcohol use, which is F10.9. Remember, you only use this when the clinical documentation is completely lacking severity details. F10.90 is your uncomplicated use, while F10.99 is for use with other alcohol-induced disorders. A really prime example of this would be a severe neurological manifestation like alcoholic polyneuropathy. That's coded as G62.1. This is where a patient is dealing with symmetrical sensory and motor peripheral nerve dysfunction. We're talking demyelination, numbness, tingling, and really chronic gait instability. And finally, we reach the highest clinical priority of them all, alcohol dependence, sitting under F10.2. This branch gets incredibly specific. You've got F10.20 for uncomplicated dependence and F10.21 for remission. But pay close attention to the 6th character expansions here. F10.220 is what you use when the patient presents with intoxication that is uncomplicated. On the flip side, F10.231 is a highly specific code for a patient who is actively experiencing withdrawal delirium. Getting this accuracy right is absolutely crucial for capturing the true, real-world medical complexity of what the patient is going through.
Okay, let's transition over to Section 4, Acute Intoxication Coding. Before we start throwing codes around, we really need to define what intoxication actually means clinically in this context. Alcohol intoxication is all about excessive consumption that leads to temporary, reversible behavioral and cognitive changes. Think about slurred speech, general incoordination, maybe some mild confusion. The massive takeaway here is that it does not involve severe medical complications. It is distinctly different from severe, life-threatening alcohol poisoning. It's really just a short-term, reversible state.
Now, what's really interesting about this matrix is how mathematically structured it is. It's like a giant puzzle. The fourth character always dictates the underlying severity. So a 1 means abuse, a 2 means dependence, and a 9 means unspecified use. Then you jump to the sixth character. A 0 always means the intoxication is uncomplicated. A 1 indicates the presence of delirium, and a 9 means it's unspecified. By understanding this grid, you aren't just memorizing a random list of codes, you're actually understanding the deep architectural logic of the ICD-10 manual itself. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, Summary and Preview of Part 2.
To ensure maximum retention, let's quickly review our core takeaways. First up, the golden rule. A positive screen means you immediately abandon those Z codes and transition straight into the active F10 codes. Second, always follow the severity hierarchy. Dependence over abuse over use. And third, the absolutely unbreakable rule of this chapter. Assign only 1 code per substance, always defaulting to the highest documented severity.
But, behavioral classifications are really just the beginning of the story. What happens when chronic, heavy alcohol use progresses way beyond temporary intoxication and actually causes severe physical organ damage? Things like alcoholic hepatitis, pancreatitis, cirrhosis, or gastritis? Well, in Part 2, we are going to dive into exactly that, exploring the specific K codes for severe physical diseases, along with digging deeper into those G codes for complex neurological manifestations. It's going to be incredibly insightful. Until then, like, share, subscribe to Decode Healthcare with Harshal.